Okay, we are recording. I do believe this is the 14th session. Can you believe it? We're up to 14 already. And we are going to be starting on page 29, right at the header. It was a very convenient place that we ended last week. So we're going to pick up right there. We're not even going to go back. Aren't you all impressed? We're going to start right where we left off. Before we do that, any unfinished business? Anything from last week that you've been chewing on, having a trouble with, or just want to comment on before we dive into new text?
I didn't do a few things that I was supposed to. I was telling myself.
That's okay, Linda. You do whatever you can do. That's
Thank you.
just the right amount.
Thank you.
Yeah. Nothing? Going once, going twice? Even you, Jerry? No,
Not even me.
Wow, that's amazing. Fantastic. All right, we're cleared for takeoff. Let's get to page 29. So we are just basically starting chapter 1. We finished the moment of awe and the divine ambush we got through last week. And so now we're going to talk about a long, loving look. So in the divine ambush, if you remember, the basic way he set this up is if you are going to live a contemplative life, you have to be able to enter your moments, each and every moment, in such a way that you are awed by it. You can still be stunned by it. You can be surprised by it. It can hit you in such a way that it is just this. It is just enough. It is everything that you could possibly hope for or need or want in that moment. To be able to do that means you got to be able to get out of the way. You're going to have to be able to step aside from the apparatus in your head that keeps telling you that you need something more or something less, or you have this preference or that distinction. That is the apparatus that makes us miserable, that takes us out of the moment. So contemplation is about stepping aside from that. So that moment of awe was the first part of chapter 1. And then he talked about the divine ambush, where he was talking about, the way we're wired, pretty much our ego is so well defended. The only way that God can break in is when we're not paying attention almost. It's like when we are not defended, we've let our guard down, and then God can ambush us, break in where we least expect it, usually from the least defended spot, the one that we're not watching, and come in and give us that moment of awe. Now he's going to move on to this long, loving look, and he's going to just continue this. You'll notice these are all very short little meditations. The chapter is just broken up. That's kind of the nature of the book. Just these little meditations, these little ideas that really only take maybe 4 or 5 paragraphs. So a long, loving look, page 29. Non-dual consciousness is about receiving and being present to the moment and to the now, exactly as it is, without splitting or dividing it, without judgment, analysis, negative critique, mental commentary, liking or disliking, without resistance, and even without registering your preferences. In other words, your mind, heart, soul, and senses are open and receptive to the moment, just as it is. That allows you to say, just this, and love things in themselves, as themselves, and by themselves, regardless of how they benefit or make demands on you. Is there any other way to love anything? You gradually learn to hold everything, attractive and non-attractive alike, together in one accepting gaze. This is divine seeing. Contemplation has been well described as a long, loving look at the real. Note that it is a deep looking more than a knee-jerk thinking, which is not really thinking at all, but usually narcissistic reacting. Contemplata, in Latin, means to gaze at something eagerly or with intense interest. It does not mean to think about it. The non-dual, contemplative mind is a whole new mind. It is truly an entirely different software and processing system. And at this point in history, it must be taught as our culture no longer practices it naturally. All right. Before we go back and pick this apart, any thoughts or comments on it?
Well, if non-dual is contemplation, I didn't know we had dual consciousness. I thought it was like more like global. It's not either or. It's like everything. You know, like my consciousness is everything chaotic.
Wait,
It's
wait,
also not
asking, Ellen? I missed parts of that. Try to ask.
right. Non-dual consciousness is contemplation, contemplative practice. So what is dual consciousness? Like, but my consciousness is not dual. Like it's like everything. It's like all over the place.
Okay, so duality is seeing things as two separate entities, two separate issues, two separate things that are in conflict with each other, and then setting them up as opposed and mutually exclusive. So in our regular consciousness, that's what we do all the time. We see things as right and wrong, light and dark, good and evil, male and female, Republican, Democrat, whatever it happens to be, but we see things as separate and opposed to one another. That's our normal way of seeing. And most importantly, it's the normal way that our conscious minds work. Our egoic consciousness is dual. It's dualistic because it's going to be comparing and contrasting all the time. The main thing that the mind biologically is set up to compare and contrast is friend or foe, right? We need to know what is going to help us in survival and what's going to hinder our survival, what's going to feed us and what is not. So that's the way the mind is set up, to look at things in those compare and contrasting modes. That's dualistic thinking. Non-dual thinking is seeing the oneness behind all of the dualities, seeing the oneness behind all the diversity of life. So non-dual or unitive thinking is what contemplation is all about. It's stepping aside from the natural duality of the way our minds work so that we can just see the oneness, see our connection to everything and everyone. How's that, Ellen? Does that help?
Yeah, that helps.
Okay. Anything
really
else?
like that.
Oh, go ahead, Sarah.
I was just gonna say I really like that. I don't know if you guys read daily reflections or anything, but I was reading that today. It's like AA material, but that's exactly what it was about. Just there is no, it isn't I, it's we, and just being able to see each other in ourselves and to see ourselves in each other is there's kind of this distortion of, especially in America, I think, kind of this idea of like individuality, and when really we're a community, we're all the same, and especially knowing that the divine is within us, and yeah, that's helpful for me because then it eliminates a lot of like unnecessary loneliness and isolation.
That's great. Yeah. Yeah, when we were studying Brother Lawrence in the practice of the presence of God, one of the things that he was working on, he said, we think that we have to invent all these means and ways of coming at God, and we relegate, okay, this is sacred space and this is profane space or secular space. Here's where I go to meet God. Here's where I go to work. And he said, it's not so. It's all one thing. It's just a constant presence of God that you can have seamlessly throughout your day. And so that would be another example of the way our minds are thinking dualistically. And here's Brother Lawrence coming on. He's non-dual. He's thinking unitively. Everything is one. It's just a seamless experience of God's presence, whether I'm doing something in the chapel or whether I'm in the kitchen. It doesn't really matter. But we do that, don't we? This is God's time. This is prayer time. This is church time. This is other time. No, it's all one thing. So trying to continue to work against the natural dualism of our heads is a constant battle. In fact, didn't he say this in the last chapter? I think he said we'll be doing this for the rest of our lives, or maybe it's in this chapter that I was prepping for this afternoon. But he said this is a lifelong process. You're never going to stop. because you're always going to be pinging back and forth. We're always going to be oscillating. In order to survive as human beings, we have to be able to think dualistically. We have to be able to make those distinctions between friend and foe, between what is nutritious and what is not, right? We have to be able to do that. But if we don't balance that out with the ability to see through that and beyond that, beneath that, to the oneness, then we're never going to be able to really fulfill our spirituality as a human being. So we want to balance both of those as much as possible.
Dave, I remember Alan Watts talking about like the idea of cause and effect being dualistic in thinking. He was saying there's just the cause.
I like that. Yeah. Of course, we would say there's just the effect, right? You're at the effect. But either way, yeah, absolutely. You know, when this is something that comes up often when we talk about the rewards that the Gospels talk about. You know, Jesus says, you know, you'll get your reward from your Father who is in secret, and he'll see what you do in secret. Don't be like the hypocrites out there. You know, they got their reward in full. And so we're thinking, oh, okay, so I go into my prayer closet in secret like a good boy or girl, and then I do what I'm supposed to do, and then Father's going to reward me. When? In heaven? Or going to bless me later when I need to pay my mortgage? I mean, you know, what are we looking at? The truth of the matter is we're thinking dualistically. We're thinking as normal cause and effect, as William was saying. I do something here, and at some point in time, I'm going to get rewarded. I go to work and I put in my 40, and I'm going to get a paycheck at the end of the week. But God doesn't work that way. With God, everything is simultaneous. So when we go into our prayer closet and we really do shut out the world and we shut out those thoughts, that connection that we have at that moment is the reward. When we give to our brother in secret or a sister and nobody knows that we did it, that connection that we have is the reward. There's no reward to wait for. It's all instantaneous. It's all simultaneous. And that's something that is really foreign to our thinking as well, because the world doesn't work that way. But if we're going to really start to think unitively, non-dually, we have to start to remember that everything about God is here and now, or it doesn't exist at all. It's all here and it's all now. That's the only place that anything exists, and certainly the only place that we're going to access God or God's rewards or blessings or anything else. Bakes your noodle, doesn't it?
Yeah.
All right, start at the top, page 29 again. Non-dual consciousness is about receiving and being present to the moment and to the now exactly as it is, without splitting or dividing it, without judgment, analysis, negative critique, mental commentary, liking or disliking, without resistance, and even without registering your preferences. In short, as Jesus would say, without judging. See, this is where the top of Matthew 7 becomes so important, because when he says don't judge, we're thinking, yeah, you know, don't criticize somebody else. Don't condemn somebody else. We're thinking that kind of judging, condemnation. But really what he's talking about is this right here. Every time you enter a moment or have a moment, anytime you're just having a waking moment, if you're thinking about that moment and you're comparing and contrasting, if you're thinking about what's not present, if you're thinking about what you need to do, you are judging. You are judging the moment. And as soon as you do that, you create a subject and an object. We create a duality, right? Here I am, here's everything else, and I'm looking at it and I'm judging it and I'm thinking about it, but I'm no longer in it. I'm not connected to it anymore. And as soon as we see ourselves as separate from, that is the separation that is sin. Sin is the separation. That's missing the mark of God's unity, missing the mark of the kind of connection that Adam and Eve had in the garden, right, before they ate of the tree. It's that unity that is God. And as soon as we start thinking about it, start judging, we're stepping away from that and we're missing the mark. That is to be in sin, to be separated from. Now, all of the behavior that comes out of the fear that comes from the separation and from the uncertainty and wondering if we're going to be able to survive or be approved and loved and all of that, that's what we normally think of as sin, because it tends to be dysfunctional, tends to be unlawful, tends to be abusive or hurtful or whatever. But it's really the separation that is the sin. So when we approach a moment non-dually, we're just there. We're not thinking about the moment. We're certainly not judging it. We're just present to it. And that's the best we're ever going to be. I thought maybe to take a few minutes right here, can anyone describe for me a non-dual moment that they had? A moment that you were in so immersed and so completely and fully present that that voice in your head was silent and you were just there. Can you think of one like that?
Yeah, I've had a few in the past 6
Give us
months.
one, Ellen. Can you describe one
Yeah,
for us?
one is I passed by, I was taking a walk. It was a hot August afternoon. I passed by the swimming pool, which I haven't swam for 10 some years, and I'm paying this HOA fee. I go, I better go. And I just went. I went back home to get my swimsuit, and I just went. It was just warm water, and I went on my back and I looked up at the sky and I started crying. It was just a very good feeling, at peace. It was serene. Looking at the sky, and then there was a plane flying by and a bird flying by. It was just a wonderful moment.
Were you worried about the form of your breaststroke while you were swimming?
No, of course no.
Good.
Yeah, there was nothing. Yeah, there was nothing. It was just there.
That's it. That's it.
Just there.
Dave, I was thinking that probably any moment of joy might be a non-dual kind of moment, but that took me into when I'm suffering, right? So I'm suffering. I am not judging my suffering. I am being present to my suffering, and I'm allowing my suffering to bring me deeper into the moment. Walk me through this branch of suffering without judging a little bit more.
Oh, you're right on here, William. This is perfect. Remember what Richard Rohr said. He said there are two paths, right, to spirituality. It's great suffering and great love. So those moments of great joy and those moments of great suffering, what's the commonality between the two? I mean, they feel way different, right? But the commonality between the two is that they are intense enough to blow out all our thinking. That's really the key. Those moments of great joy and great suffering they take us over. You know, we're just so in the moment, whether it is hurtful or pleasurable. We can't think through that. Why do people love extreme sports? Why would you want to go jump out of an airplane, or why would you want to hang from a cliff face 1,000 feet above? Because it is so intense that you have to be present. You can't be thinking about anything else in those kinds of moments. Why do we like loud music and falling in love and all the things that we love doing? It's because those are intense enough that we're not thinking. When you just throw your head back and just laugh at a joke, you're not thinking about anything. That's one of those moments that is non-dual. Non-dual feels good because we're completely present, you know? That's the key, because we're connected at that moment. So yes, great suffering and great love both can take us there. A good moment,
Dave,
a bad moment. Yeah, Ken, go ahead.
about 8 years ago, I'm going to pick the great suffering avenue, right? And I had a jaw infection, ended up losing a big part of my jaw, but they hadn't diagnosed it. I was just on painkillers. And I was up at like 3 o'clock in the morning, curled up in a fetal position, watching the clock for the clock to turn, to the point where I could take more painkillers. I was just this intense, unrelenting pain. And in the middle of that, suddenly, and I'll use Richard Rohr's word, ambush. I was ambushed by God, and is one of the most precious, outside of time, still moments I've ever felt. And it lasted. I mean, it lasted the rest of the night till the morning. I just felt so loved And so not watching the clock anymore, I just wasn't thinking about anything, even the pain. And the pain had not gone away. But I just felt this warm embrace by God. And I wasn't praying. I never did pray through that. I just felt wrapped up and loved. And I still remember that because I don't ever want to hurt that bad again. And I've told people the story. I don't ever want to hurt that bad again, to feel that non-dual consciousness was just so wonderful. But boy, yeah, God ambushed me right in the middle of my pain and came to me, and it was kind of like Ellen's story about floating on her back in the pool. Ellen, it was that same feeling of, it was so beautiful, it brought me to tears too, and it wasn't the pain bringing me to tears. It was just this present moment with God. Yeah. So
So I think it's interesting, Ken, that you said that you didn't pray through that, but that presence was the prayer. And in fact,
Yeah.
if you had started to pray in words in whatever way you did, you would have exited the moment, because now
Yeah.
you've re-engaged your mind.
Yeah.
That's why contemplative prayer is wordless and silent prayer, because we are trying to exit that mindset. But that's a great story, Ken. Absolutely.
Thank you. I like
I'm
that.
going to risk sharing, Dave.
Go ahead.
Judy, I think you can relate to this. When I am with my baby Daniela and I'm sitting on the floor and this child is just looking up at me with pure love and I'm looking at her with pure love, that's the joy. I mean, that's all I see. That's all I focus on. I'm sure Judy felt it when she saw her new granddaughter. The joy that a baby or a small child or any child, but especially a baby, they're just staring at you and they're just looking at you and you just feel this connection. I just feel this connection with God as well as with Daniela. And it's hard to even explain that feeling what does it say? A long, loving look at the real. I can relate to that when I'm sitting on the floor with my little baby and we're playing and she's cooing and so I can, that's where I can relate to this, is joy.
Mm.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if anyone else has another story that they want to say, just jump in. But look at the commonality between all of these stories that we've heard so far. They were all intense moments, right? Either sensory input, like the swim, the pain, the presence of the grandchild, whatever it happened to be, they were intense moments that completely captured us in such a way that we enter the moment completely, and it just blows out all our thoughts. My favorite analogy lately is, you put a ship in the water and it displaces its weight in the water. It's these moments are so intense, they just come in and they displace everything else, and we're just there. What contemplation? Okay, so that would be what we have, what the guy on Sunday called contemplative by catastrophe, right? And it's not necessarily catastrophe. It can be great things too, but it is the circumstances that are intense from the outside in that create this interior response. What we're trying to do in contemplation is go from the inside out. We want to be a contemplative by intention. So we are going to work. It's kind of like for an addict, right? You can hit the bottom or you can bring the bottom up. And what we're trying to do is to create the interior intensity. And it doesn't feel like intensity, but create the interior environment is probably a better word, that allows us to have the same kind of presence, to step aside from all this. Now we don't need to wait for an intense moment to have one of these kingdom moments. We can do it at will, and we can do it repeatedly. And we can get better and better at being able to just enter the moment and live our lives with that kind of mindfulness and that kind of presence. And when we're doing that, at least 51% of the time, now we're characterized by kingdom. See, that's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get a new character of our lives that is balanced non-dually. So that's the difference. You've all experienced these moments. Those of you who haven't said anything, I know you've experienced moments like this as well. And you know what we're talking about. Now, can we do the same thing? It's just like when I jumped out of an airplane and I went skydiving. It's like, yeah, that was an intense moment. The truth of the matter is, I should be able to get to that same level of presence sitting in my living room in centering prayer, just without the 120-mile-an-hour wind in my face, right? So yeah, I'm not going to have the same adrenaline rush, but I should be able to get to the same level of presence without the adrenaline rush. And that's what we're trying to do with contemplation. It's all about this non-dual presence.
Dave, I am really liking this non-dual thought in relation to pain and suffering. And I know you and I have battled about this for some time, and I've resisted this idea. But I want to kind of hover around this one a little bit, like the pain part. Like like Jerry talked about, like feeling the non-dual attachment with the baby and so on, and I get that. Yeah, I want a better understanding of how to do it in my suffering, with my suffering, using my suffering as that place of connection, essentially, the way Ken just talked about that. Because I think my clients can use some of this. So I'm wondering if anybody else has like suffering stories that took them into this.
I think I do. Please tell me if I'm wrong. The pain doesn't have to be physical. Is that correct?
No, not at all.
Remember being traveling, and I was in another town, and I had recently moved to the West Coast, and I was missing my hometown and my family. Really hurting to the bone. I had a little boy back home that I was missing intensely. And I mean, the pain is something I'll never forget. We all think about home, quote unquote. And so I sat down and I wrote a song about that. And I think you know the song, Dave. It's called The Little Fireman. And it's the first song we recorded, the effect there. And it talks about that love, like Jerry was talking about, that love of parental love and with the child that was so intense, that was very meaningful to me. And that moment seemed, I mean, I'll never forget that. I'll never forget that pain of being so lonely and alone. And it turned into a very spiritual experience in the writings. I don't know if that qualifies as what you're trying to do here or not, but for me, that was very, very real.
That's an interesting one, John, because as you're searching for the next word of the lyric, you're thinking dualistically, right? You have to be, because you're searching for words, you're trying to express something. As you're playing the song, you can get completely lost in it, and everything is just muscle memory, and you're there. But there would be a necessary moving back and forth, a kind of an oscillation in the writing process itself, as you're trying to express the feeling that had taken you into this non-dual state. So if that makes sense to you, I mean, as a writer myself, I know that process. You have to step out. You're trying to think, how do I communicate this to another person? Because that's essentially what I'm going to do with the lyric and with the music itself. And so you're thinking about chords, and you're thinking about melody, and then you're thinking about lyric, and then you go back into just listening or just getting lost in the progression as you play it. So it's a kind of a movement back and forth.
But that moment of loneliness, that moment of deep loneliness that inspired whatever came out of it, right? Like that sounds absolutely like a non-dual.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that's the thing. Now, we don't want to become self-flagellators, right? We're not going to go try to create suffering so that we can go non-dual. That's not going to work. But when it comes upon us, our first, and here's the thing, when we hit a painful moment, just like if you stick your hand on a hot stove, your first instinct is to pull your hand away, of course. You don't want to damage yourself. But when we hit a moment that is painful, either emotionally or in grief or some other way, first thing we want to do is pull back because it hurts so badly. But if we can stay in the moment, if we can just lean in and just be, that's going to be that non-dual moment. Remember the stories of the mystics like Julian of Norwich or John of the Cross or Teresa Avila, Francis of Assisi, all of their greatest visions that began their whole journeys as mystics and whatever they did for the rest of their lives came out of some form of suffering. Usually it was a very grave illness where they almost died, or it was imprisonment, or it was whatever it happened to be. But there was some great suffering that catapulted them into this mystical experience that then became the character for the rest of their lives. So often that is the case. Julian of Norwich lived through the Black Death, where 3/4 of her village was killed, and they couldn't even bury the bodies. They just had to stack them outside the village circle. Those kind of experiences were certainly catapulting her into a different space and time. And then she became very ill herself. So yeah, it's a question of what do we do with the intensity of the moment? Do we recoil from it? Do we start thinking about it? Or do we just enter in? And that's going to be the difference between whether it ends up being dual or non-dual.
I think for me, the spiritual experience is not in like thinking that I'm alone, because I know that like everybody feels alone. So I'm not really alone. But I think for me it's like knowing like when I hit, like if I'm at the very bottom and I feel like there's like um it's the moment when I realize that I can't do it by myself. It's the moment when I realize like I need God to help me through it. It's the moment when I realize, wait a minute, he's holding me right now, That for me is the spiritual awakening. That for me is the spirituality, the spiritual moment. It's not in thinking that I'm like in a disparate state of like isolation. Like it's that moment that makes me search for something else outside of myself that brings me to the spiritual awakening. That's just the way I interpret it. But
I really like that, Sarah. Remember the way that I opened our session tonight with the prayer, where I was talking about, if we can become more conscious that everything that we have has been given to us, and we're basically just moving things around, we're completely dependent. We can't create the resources we need. We need to just move them around, basically, like deck chairs on the Titanic. That kind of dependence, the reality of that dependence, the awareness of that dependence moves us into this more childlike state. Because children, they don't understand what their parents are about. They just trust that there's going to be pancakes on the table in the morning, right? And that their parents are a never-ending flow of pancakes. That's the way the kid looks at it. To allow ourselves to move back into that place where we don't have to have it all figured out. We're not in control. We've seen the boss's job and we don't want it. It's kind of like that. And that puts us into this completely different, this can put us into a non-dual state where we can start to relax into the vulnerability and the dependence and all of the uncertainty and the unknowing and the things that we are powerless to control. We can still on the other side of that, still trust that it's going to be okay. That's what I liked about what you were saying, Sarah. And I have the same sort of feeling. Trying to move back into that space is critical.
And even if the situation doesn't change and God says, I'm not going to change it, but I will be your peace. And the situation or the circumstance that is ripping us apart God goes, I am enough. Seek me. Seek first the kingdom of God. Don't seek it in having a peaceful circumstance where everything's, smooth. When you go in the valley, God is with you. He said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. And you just take one more step. You just get through the day, and God is there saying, like Sarah said, he's holding us. And it's really difficult, but it's the deep part is that you get closer to the Lord and you want to seek him out more than the best circumstance. And then I know that he's real, that he didn't turn his back, and he says, I'm with you in the thick of it. And that is such an awakening for me, that I'm not alone. God sees it all. He sees everything that's going on. And, he tells you it's going to be okay. I'm with you.
It's good, Carol.
I love that. I had a similar experience. I've been experimenting more with just being attentive to how I'm behaving in a given moment or period of time. And when I felt myself getting a little raggedy around the edges at home, and I didn't like the way I was feeling. And I said, I'm gonna go get some quiet time. And so I went upstairs, and I've been practicing centering myself with some very deep breathing and welcoming, like almost trying to get a sense of where in my body is this stuff going on. I got in touch with resentment, and I got in touch with fear, and it was in my gut and in my chest. And I was practicing breathing more deeply into it and saying to myself, I welcome you, anger. I welcome you, resentment. Little Judy, you don't have to worry about this. God has you. Lord, take this, and I give it to you. And I did experience a lifting of weight. And there was a sense of peace that came in, and a softening of my whole being. And I was so filled. There were a lot of tears that came to my eyes because I knew he was present with me. And I didn't feel alone. And I can really relate to what Carol was saying. And I just, I could feel it passing. And it was powerful. I don't think I'd quite experienced, I didn't let myself go to the story behind the feelings, because oftentimes I've gotten sidetracked with that stuff, and I just stayed with the feeling and where it was lodged in my body, and let it flow through. And it flowed out eventually. It took a while, but it did pass. And I knew that wasn't me. I just knew it wasn't me. He was with me. I didn't do that on my own.
What struck me about what Judy was just saying is that she followed almost to the letter, and I don't know if this is conscious or not, but there's something called the welcoming practice or the welcoming prayer. And
Mm.
it's a three-step way that came out of centering prayer. So Thomas Keating and a couple other Trappist monks created centering prayer in the 70s as an updated version of the ancient hesychastic prayer, 2000 years ago. And then a nun, using those same principles, created the welcoming practice, which is designed to do exactly what Judy just said. You get triggered emotionally by something and it's just pulling you out. And then you go into this prayer, which first of all, just acknowledges what you're feeling and you sit in it and you own it. You just let it really settle, kind of exactly what Judy described. And then you actually welcome it. You consciously welcome it. Welcome anger, welcome resentment, welcome whatever as a part of yourself that's revealing something about yourself that you need to know. And then the third step is to say these little short prayers that are designed to take you again through it and back to the moment so that you can re-engage in the moment. And Judy followed that just about to the letter, whether it was conscious or not. But this is something that we can also develop with the welcoming practice to help us to recover from triggers. So William, you were asking, how do we, I guess the way to put it is use suffering to allow us a non-dual experience. Well, the first thing we have to do is recover enough from the triggering to be able to settle back into the moment. And so a practice like this is something that you can use to do that. Obviously, there's lots of other ways, but it just struck me because Judy followed it just about to the letter. So that's the thing, to be able to process that, to move through it, and then to come back to the moment, because the only healing that's available to us is God's healing, right? And the only place we're going to be accessible to God's healing is in the moment, in the here and the now. So if we are pulled away, if we're doing anything to try to attenuate the pain, whether it's by taking a drink or distracting ourselves or doing anything else, we are simultaneously cutting ourselves off from the only healing that we're ever going to get. And so what we want to do is lean back in, but we're going to have to deal with the trigger of the moment, whatever it happens to be, in order to be able to do that and to clear the decks again.
And let the moment be justice.
Just
Justice.
this. Exactly. There you go. If any of you are interested in the welcoming practice, I've got some links and I can send them to you. Actually, if you have the contemplative ebooks 1 and 2 that some of you got the links to, it's in contemplative ebook 2 in the practice section. So there's pages and links to, dedicated to the welcoming practice. It could be a useful tool.
Dave, it seems like a lot of what everybody is talking about in this section is what we've talked about before with surrender and kind of acceptance in a sense. I mean, aren't we surrendering to the pain to some level, or we're surrendering to that moment of joy and happiness? You're just sort of letting yourself go with it. And particularly with pain, that's probably harder with it. Surrendering to it.
I like
Wherever
that.
it is and wherever it takes you, whether it takes you all the way through to death or just gets you through a certain point and then you come back out of it. I mean, in a way, it's tied together.
And you just used Rohr's exact language. If we go all the way back, right? He said you have to allow your moment to awe you, to even stun you, and then surrender to that. So it's exactly what you just said, Kath. And it's really what Judy was doing in that moment, right? She went through the process so that she could surrender and then just rest on the other side.
William, you asked a few minutes ago, how that could be used with your clients. I'm not going to pretend I know how you should talk to your clients, but for me, just to expand on what I talked about, I did surrender, and the pain was too overwhelming to fight anymore. So, if you want to call that rock bottom, I mean, it's 3 o'clock in the morning and a lot of pain, and I'm not allowed to take any more pain meds, and so there was nothing more than to just lay there and be in the moment. And so I surrendered to the moment and surrendered to the pain. And that's where the peace of God really came in, right there. So I think surrender, that's the theme we're talking about now. I would say that definitely was what happened with me.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. and that simultaneously surrendering to God and surrendering to the pain,
Yes.
discomfort, and fusing those two things together, allowing our pain to take us there.
Yes.
Yeah.
I really like that.
Of course, we're not thinking about that.
Right, right.
If you're thinking about it, you've already left the building.
Yeah.
That is the reality of it, right? That's why this is so sneaky and squirrely, because we want to think about it. We want to own it. We want to grab it by the throat and make it ours. And as soon as we do that, we're already cooked. Yeah, we
Or
already
maybe we're hoping we're gonna move through it a lot quicker than we need to. Right? Again.
Right.
God, can you work with me a little faster? A little faster?
But Dave, don't you have non-dual moments when you're like totally in the zone and you're writing and you're like the words are just flowing out of you and it's like as it is on the paper, it's just like, you know what I mean? Can't you have like
Absolutely. Whether it's contemplative journaling, where you're just basically automatic writing, you're just letting things flow. And that could be for a lyric, the way John was talking about writing the lyrics of his song as well. But of course, then you're going to have to come back and you're going to have to edit that product if you're going to want to have it for somebody else. Because what flows out made sense, it didn't even have to make sense, but it was just what was spontaneously coming out. And there's a lot of gold in there, but it does have to be refined. And so the editing process is highly cognitive,
right.
whereas the creative process can be a flow. That's why I was saying you're kind of flowing back and forth in the process. But yes, absolutely.
When I was in that process, I want to add that I wasn't thinking. It was kind of like a mental movie in which I was a part, and I was seeing mental pictures of what was going on, and so I put those words down, and the next thing I knew, the song was done, and that's been a part of my show ever since. I do that song every show I do. Not a big deal out of it. It is a part, and it means a lot to me to do. The dual consciousness comes afterwards for me, as you were indicating, Dave, the refining and editing, and the even rhyming, if you will. But and oftentimes the lyric will come first, or the music will come, to which you will adapt either the lyric or the music, depending upon what came first. But in that situation, they both came at the same time, and that's exactly what just blew me, and to this day blows me away that I even did that. It was a nice thing,
Okay, so John is a lot closer to Mozart than I am. But, heard tell, legend has it that if you look at Mozart's original manuscripts, there are no cross-outs, there are no additions, no revisions. He was just basically taking dictation from God, and it just flowed out of him that way.
Seriously.
Like,
wow.
yeah, that's what I've read and what I've heard.
Wow.
And John sounds like he had an experience somewhat like that. Usually my songs are a bit more laborious, let's say, but they have their moments.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of the very definition of the word inspired, right? Like coming from the idea that spirit is in us, right? And the way John described that, it was totally inspired.
Yeah.
What does inspire mean? It means to breathe in. That's the whole idea.
I want to add one more story. When Kathy said about surrender, it reminded me in my other fellowship at Fullerton Free. We call him Papa Neil. He was a POW during the Korean War. And so they lined up all the US soldiers kneeling and they were systematically killing each one. And it was his turn. And I think this is what surrender means. He started singing Amazing Grace. He doesn't know why. And they stopped. And they say, yeah, we'll just do this tomorrow. And that's surrender. That's it. You say, this is the day I die. I will be here singing Amazing Grace.
Mm.
And that just brings chills into my, just now, again.
Mm.
Yeah.
So let's do this. Boy, all we have to do is put a quarter in you all and we're good for an hour. But this was time well spent, because I really wanted to try to bring this home, and your stories and all of your comments, I think, have done that for us, and hopefully for a lot of people who will be watching this recording later, to try to get this feel for what it is we're coming up against. When we talk about contemplation, it's so amorphous, it's just out there, it's just an abstract thought. To try to bring it home to something that we know that we've experienced, and now we're going to dedicate ourselves to recreating that experience from the inside out. That's important. We'll read one more paragraph, and then I'm going to try to play you a little film clip. So we'll see if it works. I've never tried that before. But his second paragraph is, in other words, your mind, heart, soul, and senses are open and receptive to the moment. Everything we've just been talking about, right? Just as it is. You're not judging it. You're not thinking about it. You're not saying what would make it better or what you need to extract from it. That allows you to say just this, and love things in themselves, as themselves, and by themselves, regardless of how they benefit or make demands on you. Is there any other way to love anything? So without judgment, without agenda, right? Just to be able to be present to the moment, put aside your preferences and just let it play through. That's the whole thing. This clip comes from the movie Jackie, which is a story of Jackie Kennedy right after the assassination. And she's suicidal and she's a mess. So she's in one of those moments of great suffering, right, that we've been talking about. And she has a series of counseling sessions with a Catholic priest. And the last one was the really meaningful one that I want to try to play you right now. And the priest was played by the great John Hurt. And he was only months away from his own death. So think about that. He was diagnosed with terminal cancer. His choice was to keep working to the very last moment. And this was one of his last roles, or may have been his last role. So think about the words that he says and how it was real to him because of his situation and how close he was to his own death. And then hear the exchange and think about how it's connecting with what we've been talking about here. So, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, now I'm gonna play it for just a second and then I'll stop it again, and you tell me if you've got audio.
Are you really here?
Yes.
You could hear that?
Yes. Yes.
And it's loud enough?
We can be a little louder.
Mhm.
Okay, I don't know if I can turn up I don't know if turning up my volume turns up your volume, but let's try it. Listen closely.
Are you really here?
Because I needed to talk.
You say that you pray every night to die, that your children have no use for you. You wish only to be with your husband. And yet, I'm not burying you today. There comes a time in man's search for meaning when one realizes that there are no answers. And when you come to that horrible, unavoidable realization, you accept it or you kill yourself. Or you simply stop searching. I have lived a blessed life. And yet every night when I climb into bed, turn off the lights, and stare into the dark, I wonder, is this all there is?
You wonder?
Every soul on this planet does. But then when morning comes, we all wake up and make a pot of coffee.
Why do we bother?
Because we do. You did this morning. You will again tomorrow. But God, in his infinite wisdom, has made sure it is just enough for us.
Mhm.
Mm.
Wow.
First time I saw that scene, it stopped me in my tracks as I was watching this movie. And
Yeah.
I've quoted it over and over again. It is the perfect expression of what we're talking about. You know, when you finally realize that you are not going to get answers in the way that you want them, and you stop searching. And then what's left after that? It's that this moment can be just enough for us. It can be just this if we let it, if we immerse in it. But it's nothing spectacular. It's just getting up in the morning and making up the coffee. It's running with your kids on the beach. It's doing all the things that we've just been talking about that we're doing. And it's not going to be any more than that. If we can't find God there, we're not going to find God in the clouds, on a throne, or anywhere else. This is what Jesus is trying to tell us. It is in the simplest of things, in the least of these, that kingdom resides. That's what we're talking about. And I just love that little bit. And John Hurt gets my Academy Award every time. Oh. All right. We're not going to top that. So that's where we're going to wrap it up. I got 2 paragraphs in. See how you are? This is a great evening. Thanks, everybody. Really appreciate the conversation. It was perfect. All right, Scotty.
God, we're so grateful that you're here and along with us for this journey of discovery. And there's so many times when we don't realize what's going on in the background because we're not present to our moment. Help us to get quiet, Lord, and help us to be present, to appreciate what we have instead of always looking for more or other ways or new things or more things. Just help us to stay focused on that which you've provided for us, our daily bread, so to speak, and our ability to communicate with you 24/7. Lord, we're so grateful for the lives we have and filled with challenges and blessings all at the same time. But your presence makes the joy in the journey more tolerable, because sometimes the joy takes different curves that we're not used to and we're not ready for. But thank you, Lord, for always being there to reassure us we're going to be okay. Lord, we love you. We thank you, and we pray all this in Jesus' holy name.
Amen.
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 Thank
Thanks.
you,
Thank you,
guys.
Scotty.
Bye.
Oh.
You're welcome, guys. Good night,
See
guys.
ya Sunday.
Right.
Thanks,
Thanks,
everyone.
Oh, see you Friday.
See you
for those
Friday.
Bye bye. Yeah,
Friday.
Friday. Don't forget Friday.
What's on Friday? What's going on
Friday
Friday?
is Music on Your Heart. It's a potluck dinner, and then we'll move into Bill Protzman leading us in another Music on Your Heart at 7 o'clock. So dinner at 6, music at 7.
And we're
So come
streaming,
with your
right?
songs
We're
in mind.
streaming. We're
Streaming?
Yeah.
streaming.
You
Yes,
decided we're
we will
streaming.
stream it because somebody asked us to stream it. Who was it?
Yeah.
Somebody
Yeah.
asked us. to stream it. I think
Michael.
it was
Michael.
Michael. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We'll stream
yeah,
it.
yeah.
So we'll be streaming the music.
So
Okay.
join us, William.
Yeah, it'd be pretty
be-
boring to stream the dinner in the other room. So.
Why
I
do
want to
people
see what
eat?
Judy cooks. I want to see what Judy cooks.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
All right, good
Great.
night.
Bye,
Night,
guys.
See y'all
everybody.
then.
Good night, everybody.
See you guys.
Bye.
All right. Bye-bye.
Good night, good night, good night. And good night, Jerry, Jordana, and
Good
Linda.
night.
Okay, you guys. See you Friday.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.